Hello, my name is Sloan Sinclair, and today's date is April 11th, 2019. I am at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina, interviewing Mr. Wayne Hermance about his military experiences in the Gulf War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation Enduring Freedom. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go any further, could you please spell your full name?
WayneHermance.
Thank you. Would you like to tell me a bit about your childhood, family, and where you grew up?
Sure. I grew up in a little town in New York called Glens Falls. It's about 4.5 hours north of New York City. Had a brother and 2 sisters. Childhood was pretty good. Had a father who drank a lot, so he wasn't around too much, but a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So we had, it was a pretty, other than my father being an alcoholic, I had, pretty normal childhood, sports and playing with the neighborhood kids, I guess. And the town was real kid-friendly, where you could ride your bike all over the place, so it was a really good place to grow up.
Yeah. Did you have any family members in the military?
We actually, are you asking immediate family or history? Or
just history.
So we traced our family tree back to the Revolutionary War. So we had someone in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, Vietnam. My dad was in Vietnam. My sister was in the Army. My brother was also a Marine, and my son now is in the Marines.
What do you remember about 9/11, and where were you, and how did you react?
I was actually delivering mail in Hickory. I remember watching the first tower get hit at the snack bar, delivering mail there, and then a little while later I was delivering mail at a tattoo place, and he had the TV on when the second tower fell. I just remember, I was in the reserves at the time, so I just remember thinking, here goes another war, and just remember being really, mixed between mad and sad.
Mm-hmm. Did this make you want to go fight?
Yes, it did. Like I said, I was in the reserves at the time, and I guess the fact that, not just because it was my fellow Americans, but being from New York, it kind of hit home, so I just remember being ready to want to go do something. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What inspired you to join the service, and why did you choose the Marines?
I was actually at a parade when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and it was a Veterans Day parade, and I remember at the end of the parades when they had all the veterans go through, and I think my aunt brought me, and I remember asking her, who they were, and she told me who they were and what they had done, and from that point on I wanted to be like them, be in the military, protect them. And I chose the Marines partly because my dad was a Marine, and partly just going through all the different, talking to the different recruiters. I just felt like the Marines were the best. I wanted to be in the infantry, so that's kind of what they're known for.
Did your dad inspire you?
A little bit. He told me stories about his time in the Marines. So a little bit of that was an inspiration for me, yes.
What was the highest rank you held in the service?
I was a first sergeant, which is E8.
And do you recall the day you entered the service?
Yeah, I do.
What do you remember?
So it was June of 1987. I just remember, flying from New York to South Carolina and then riding the bus. I just remember not really knowing what to expect, but being kind of excited and scared at the same time.
Did you know anyone that was also going into the Marines?
Yeah, I went in on a buddy program. There was originally supposed to be 6 of us, but some guys had to drop out, so me and this guy named Keith, we went to boot camp together and we were in the same platoon.
Would you tell me about your experience in basic training? What do you remember most about that time period?
I probably what I remember most is probably pain, because the physical nature of it, always being pushed and punished, with exercise or just whatever what they do. So probably remember that the most.
What was the harshest fitness that you had to encounter?
Probably the hikes. We did at boot camp we did a 10-mile hike with all of our gear, probably about 50, 60 pounds worth of gear. So that was probably the hardest thing I remember physically.
Could you talk about your duties during the first Gulf War?
I was in the infantry. We actually had a Humvee with what's called a tow missile system on top. So our job was to shoot tanks with those missiles, and so our whole unit it was a kind of a mechanized war. So for the few days, so basically it was just going up and tank battles and us shooting at tanks.
What would you describe your first experience of combat and your reaction during the first Gulf War?
Actually, my first experience was we were mortared right after the ground war started. Well, actually, right before that, I was woken up when the air war started by the vibration of the ground when all the bombs being dropped. And my reaction to that was just, well, I guess here we go, it started. And then we got mortared shortly after that. And just remember, just trying to take cover, and it was a little bit different of an experience, someone trying to hurt you. So it was kind of not a scared moment, but antsy type moment, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel mentally and physically prepared for the first Gulf War?
I did. I guess I was pretty young, so back then with all the weaponry we had, I kind of felt like Superman, like nobody could hurt me. Although, no, that was not the truth, but that's how we felt.
Yeah. What were your mental strategies to get through this?
Just relying on, the stuff that we had been trained to do, and, doing what our leaders told us, and knowing that we were seeing some of their equipment, we knew we were kind of superior to them equipment-wise. So the strategy was really just rely on your training and do what you were told.
Prior to leaving for your first OIF deployment in Iraq, what had you heard about the conditions of war from your fellow Marines?
Well, I deployed right at the start of the initial invasion into Iraq, so I hadn't really heard anybody talking about it because it hadn't, it was just starting.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what you were thinking as you flew to Iraq for your first OIF deployment? There
was a big shift. I do remember, like I said, in the Gulf War, I felt like I was Superman, but at this point I had left active service for 9 years and then went into reserve, so I was quite a bit older, and I had kids, and I was just thinking, wow, I'm not Superman anymore. I can definitely get hurt, and just trying to go through my mind, everything that we've been trained. But I do remember thinking, this is a different ball game. I'm older and maybe a little wiser, and know that things can turn out different.
Would you be willing to talk about your combat experiences in Fallujah?
Yes. Well, our mission was a little bit different in Fallujah. I was no longer in the infantry. I was in what's called civil affairs. So our mission was to, the Battle of Fallujah had happened a few months prior to that, and our main job was to talk to the Iraqi people and see what they needed. We were kind of like civilian contractors, where you go in and, whatever they needed as far as, do they need power, do they need stuff rebuilt, and then we would contract the Iraqi construction workers to do the work. So it was a little bit different. We weren't hands-on fighting. We did do some where the insurgents were shooting at us and stuff like that, but our main mission was not the actual fighting. We had an infantry unit around us, so we were mainly tasked with just, rebuilding the city after all the damage from the invasion.
Did you ever think about quitting?
No. I know there was times where, long days and you got stressed out a lot because we were in the city 6 days a week for the whole deployment. So there was times where I was, kind of mentally drained, but never felt like quitting, though.
And was the culture drastically different?
It was a whole lot different. Women having to, be almost completely covered. I guess the mentality of them is a lot different. I mean, just they pray every, unlike us, they have certain times a day where they have to pray, according to their religion. And I think the one thing that, because we dealt with the civilians there a lot, the one thing that I found hard to deal with them was, in their culture, we would, get the contractors to do work, and if there was a certain deadline coming up, they would tell us the work was done, even if it wasn't, because it was, I guess in their culture, it was better to lie and say it's done than for you to find out it wasn't done. So it was really a lot different culturally that way.
Do you prefer hands-on fighting or rebuilding?
Well, I think every human probably prefers rebuilding. No one likes to have to fight. So I would probably say the rebuilding is more gratifying. I mean, no one wants to have to try to kill another human. But I don't think any sane person wants that, really.
What were your roles and responsibilities for your second OIF deployment in Iraq?
The second one was the Fallujah one, and so my role on the team was basically security. Since I had the infantry background, I was tasked with. We had a chief warrant officer who was kind of in charge of talking to the people, and my role was just to provide security and make sure the other guys were doing what they were supposed to, as far as the security element.
What did you do for fun during your free time in Iraq?
On the little base that we were staying, we had a horseshoe pit. We played horseshoes. We watched a lot of movies. That's kind of the deployment thing to do, I guess, is either play cards or watch movies. And we watched a lot of movies. Our families would send them to us. We watched them on our computer. That was the big thing. And usually you watched the same one about 10 or 15 times.
Did your unit have any special traditions while deployed in Iraq?
No, because that unit was kind of a provisional unit. We were just put together for one deployment and then kind of disbanded. So it was just a short-term unit. So there was no really. It hadn't only been around for probably 18 months, and then it disbanded. So.
What was your primary duties and responsibilities during your deployment in Afghanistan?
I was in a transportation billet. We had infantry guys that were at forward operating bases, and they would contact us with support as far as like food and water and ammunition resupply. So my job was to coordinate with our drivers of when and where to take all this stuff up to the infantry guys.
What was the most important thing you did during each deployment?
Personally, I think the most important thing is just making sure, your guys and your buddies are taken care of. That's the most important thing.
Did you experience culture shock in the Middle East?
Yeah, just, I think the biggest thing is you don't talk, men don't talk to women over there as far as us. Here we consider, women and men to be equal, but over there it's not quite the same way. They're just not allowed to talk to men they don't know unless they have their husband's permission. So that's, obviously a lot different than it is here.
And how did you deal with missing kids? Did you communicate with them at all?
We wrote lots of letters back and forth, and our team had a satellite phone, and each member of the team had one night to where we could call home for a little while. And that was really the only way we communicated.
How often could you do this?
I mean, the letters, I wrote letters on, I don't know, several letters almost every day, and my family did the same thing, and then that one phone call a week.
What are some of the major social differences between life in the Middle East compared to life in America?
Well, here, I mean, you're pretty much free to do just about anything here. And over there, you have a lot of, each community has their own community leaders, I guess you'd call them. And most of the stuff over there, they had to get permission to do. I mean, they had very little freedoms. I think that's the biggest difference.
Did you have any experiences with the Iraqi and Afghanistan civil? If yes, could you describe these experiences?
I didn't have any in Afghanistan. In Iraq, we talked to the civilians. I didn't talk to them as much as our Chief Warrant Officer did, but when we did security, there was a lot of kids that would come around us, and we got to talk to the kids quite a bit. And we would bring them as part of our goodwill mission. You know, we'd bring candy and soccer balls and stuff like that to them. So I got to know one of the kids pretty good. His name was Cameron. And then we had a couple of Iraqi interpreters that were assigned to us, and I got to know them really well and talk to them a lot.
Was it hard to trust the civilians?
I think as a kind of a precaution, you just didn't trust them, just so in case something happened, you were prepared for the worst. The kids were easier to trust, but you just kind of, as self-preservation, you just didn't really, as a rule, you just didn't really trust the adults. You didn't come out and tell them you didn't trust them, but you just didn't do it just in case.
Mm-hmm. Did you keep in touch with Cameron?
No, I wish I could have somehow, because he seemed like a really good kid. He knew a lot of, they did have internet service over there, so he knew a lot of what was going on the outside. It wasn't quite the same way in Afghanistan, but I wish there was some way I could have, but I didn't have any way to do it.
How old was he when you met him?
I'm guessing around 12. And I think my son was around 11 about the time I deployed that time, so I guess being the same age, I kind of warmed up to him, and he was come talk to me all the time whenever we were out in his village.
How did you and your fellow service members regard to the enemy combatants?
Well, we respected, they were doing what they believed was right. Whether we believe that or not, I mean, that's each individual, but they believed what they were doing was right, so, I mean, I respect them as far as that much, but, other than the respect factor, I didn't really think too much about them.
What did you remember about returning home after your deployments?
Well, that was always, the happiest time, when you get to see family again. There's mixed feelings when you come back. I mean, it's a real happy time, but you quickly realize that your life has been on hold for however long you've been gone. So you come back and they've had 7, 8 months, 10 months of moving on with their life, and you think life's going to be the same as when you left. And they tell all these stories of what they did, and you realize you were kind of missing all that stuff. But it's a real happy time.
What did you do when you got back home?
I slept a lot when I first got back, especially because of the time difference, I guess. Body was on a different clock, I would say. So I did a lot of sleeping, but I always deployed out of Camp Lejeune, so my family would come down and we just enjoyed time on the beach down there when we first got back.
In your opinion, what led you to your highest enlisted rank in the service?
Just doing my job. I always, tell people don't worry about promotions, because they'll come if you do what you're supposed to do. So I just doing everything I was supposed to do and taking care of my guys and making sure the job was done, and then you'll get promoted.
In your opinion, what does it mean to serve honorably?
That's a tough one. I think just following the rules and doing your job. A lot of guys try to go outside that box and try to do it their own way, but in the military, I mean, you pretty much have rules you got to follow, and you do that with a good heart and good intentions, and that's honorable.
What advice would you give anyone thinking about serving in the military?
I would tell them that find the job what are they interested in? What kind of job do they want? Are they thinking about college afterwards, or what the case might be? And then I would say go into the branch of service is going to best give you what you want in the future. If your intentions are to go to college after, I mean, the Air Force might be a good choice. So it just really depends on what you want your future to be. I would say think long and hard of which branch you want to go in.
Were there any other major eye-opening experiences?
None that I can think of off the top of my head.
And did you ever want to join a different branch?
I briefly thought about the Army, and to be quite honest, at my high school we had at the end of the year we'd always they'd give away scholarships at a big assembly, and the Army and the Marines recruiters came and gave awards, and to be quite honest, the Marine looked like he was what you would picture someone in the military, and the Army recruiter was kind of out of shape and kind of heavy, and I was like, I don't want to go in the Army. Just doing the Marines. He looks better.
Are there any other stories, experiences, or thoughts you would like to share with us today before we conclude this interview?
I would just say, guys when you deploy, I mean, guys in the military in general get pretty close, but when you deploy, you get really close with the guys you're with. I mean, you do everything together. I mean, you can't just get away from them. It's not like you can just hop in your car and go to Walmart or go to the movies. So you're with these guys, 24 hours a day for your whole deployment. So I would say that just the bond you create with the guys you deploy with, even guys you might not necessarily get along with, once you get back and kind of time goes by, you still miss those guys too, and it's just a pretty incredible bond that's formed out of adversity or hard times or whatever the case may be.
Are you still in touch with any of these guys?
A few of them I am. I think that's one good thing. I mean, Facebook has been a great tool for stuff like that, where you can stay in touch. Some of the guys I've deployed with, are from different states, but there's a few guys that I stay in contact with, and we have gotten together from time to time, kind of like a mini reunion type deal.
Were you ready to stop serving?
My body was ready to stop serving. I would have liked to have stayed and kept going, but I had some injuries that my body was really starting to feel the physical toll of it, and it was getting harder and harder to stay in the type of shape that they needed me to stay in, so it was time for me to go.
Mm-hmm. Did your beliefs have any impact on you when you were in combat?
Yeah, being a Christian, I think that played a big role. I believe that, even though you're at war, you still treat people, respectfully. We didn't get any prisoners of war, but if we had, I like to think that I would have, treated them justly. Just like I said, our interpreters became almost like brothers to us. So because we treated them, with that respect and out of friendship and even though we're different, we're the same.
Mm-hmm. Did you inspire your son to join the military?
I think so. I never tried to push him to do it, but I think myself and my brother was still serving at the time, so I think him growing up with that, I think that was kind of an inspiration for him. But he went to college first, which we did push college, so he went to college first and became an officer. But I mean, he has said that I was an inspiration to him, partly to join. So.
Okay, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
All right.